I'm not sure how it happened, but yet again, we are halfway through the month and I have not done my wrap up yet. So here I am with my list of all the books I read in August. Hey everyone, it is Ray, and welcome to my little bookish corner of the world where I talk everything book, whether that is cozy mystery, fantasy, romantasy, historical fiction, or romance. Today I have got a nice mixture of books. I have one that is an ebook, and the rest are all physical, and it's time to just get started on my August wrap up. First on the list is actually the last book I read in the month, and purely because of the size of the book that it is on top of the pile, and that is Dead Man's Folly by Agatha Christie. This is another Poirot mystery where he works with author Ariadne Oliver, who is actually based in part on Agatha Christie herself. She's self-insertion at its best, right? Unfortunately, this is another Ariadne Oliver murder mystery where a child is sadly the victim. In Halloween Party, it is a girl getting drowned in an apple bobbing barrel. And in this one, it is an unfortunate girl getting strangled in a way that she was actually expecting to die, but only fake die because she is playing the victim in a murder mystery game that is part of a fair that Ariadne Oliver has organised. This does put Ariadne at the centre of everything, and she is obviously the main suspect because she knows everything that is meant to go on. But as you get through the book, you discover that there is mistaken identity, there is false identity, there is infidelity, there are, to a degree, there is a bigamist relationship, and there are actually more than one murder, sadly. This book is actually really interesting, and I do love my Poirot, as I have said multiple times before. I think that he is probably my favourite of Christie's creations, and that doesn't change in this book, which comes in the sequence directly after one of my all-time favourites, which is Hickory Dickory Dock. So if you haven't read Dead Man's Folly and you aren't triggered by the idea of a child dying, especially in the way she does, then I would say pick this one up. It is very creative, and I do love the simplicity of this particular cover. It's part of a set. It doesn't quite match the rest of them, but I think that it is very cleverly done, and it does have some meaning, especially with the folly of the title in the background. So that's book one. Book two is another cozy mystery. In fact, there's a couple on this list, and that is a reread of Agatha Raisin and the Quiche of Death. If you haven't seen it already, I did a full detailed analysis of Agatha Raisin and the Quiche of Death versus the TV version of the exact same mystery with Ashley Jensen in the main role. I have always enjoyed this book. On reread, it didn't read as well, and there are certain characters I think experienced a very negative vibe because of the way they were portrayed in the book versus how they were portrayed both in the radio plays with Penelope Keith and in the TV show that was, as you can see, As Seen on Sky back in 2014. That said, it is worth a read. It's definitely a really good introduction. And even if you don't continue reading past the first few books because you're not warming to her character and you find that her character in this is too harsh, I would say jump on the TV show. There are 4 seasons to watch. Though they are extended episodes rather than a considerable number of them, they are worth a good viewing, and I love Roy in the show. My third book is another cozy mystery. Oh my god, we're sensing a theme here, but it does go off after this book, I think. This is The Murder Game by Tom Hindle. It's the first book by this author that I have read, and it is another locked room murder. There are a number of them. Some of them are done very well. This one had a few interesting twists, and it was one of the books on my 1-star reviews picks my reads for August list. Sadly, well, actually, fortunately, it wasn't as bad as the 1-star review made it out to be, but it wasn't amazing. And though I didn't guess the murderer, which is always a huge bonus, I didn't find myself actually caring who'd done it after a while. That sounds so bad. Pick it up if you like something that's a little bit predictable, a little bit more modern. But if you are looking for something that is Christie-esque, go for Christie, honestly. Just pick up a Christie because she cannot be beaten. Beaten, MC Beaton. But anyway, there's my attempted humour. I would say that this is an okay book. I have got another on the shelf, I think Murder at Lake Garda. And a friend of mine has just finished that book and said, I wish I'd picked up something else. So yeah, I am going to give him another try. But I wasn't hugely impressed with this, though I didn't give it the 1-star that the reader who read this originally did. And if you do want to find out more about what I thought about this book, check out my other video and I will link it above. The next book was my first preview of the month, and that is A Pirate's Life for Tea by Rebecca Thorne. This is the sequel to You Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, and I loved it. I found it was the perfect cozy romantasy fantasy novel. It built far more on the mythology behind everything that occurred in Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. I'm not going to spoil it because it doesn't come out until next month, but I will go so far as to say that the relationship between Rhaena and Chianthe develops even further. You get more of their background, their backstory, and you also see them playing off their humour, playing off against each other. They've got a very strong relationship. It's incredibly funny to watch and read about and imagine, because I am a very visual person when it comes to my reading. And I think that it is one of those books, there's pirates in it, so you get adventure on the open seas with magic and mystery and dragons, and yeah, it's fun. And this is, I'd say, given that this is coming out in the autumn months, it is definitely a cozy read to enjoy while you're sipping on a cup of tea or a cup of hot chocolate or a glass of wine, whatever takes your fancy, on a rainy Sunday afternoon. It is wonderful, very enjoyable, and I have to thank Tor and my copy because it's great. Next book was The Undermining of Twyla and Frank. For some reason, mine wasn't bound very well and some of the pages started falling out as I was reading it. But this is by Megan Bannon, and it is the sequel to The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which I really enjoyed last year, I think. This is the story of another two marshals in Tanrian marshals who are roaming the lands, and they discover there is something even more dark and desperate going on in the land that they purvey, and they come across a dragon. There seems to be a theme here. It's either cozy mysteries or dragons, though I think that there aren't any dragons in the rest of the books that I'm talking about. This was fun. It was slower reading, I think, than The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, if only because it was very, very clear from the outset that there were sparks flying, and if that's what you're reading it for, then that's fantastic. I did enjoy Twyla and Frank's relationship. It was obvious from the outset that Frank was incredibly invested in Twyla, and then Twyla starts dating somebody else, and you start asking questions about this other person's validity and his worthiness for Twyla. So yeah, it is good. I love the creativity of the covers. I loved that about the first book as well. There's something about them that you can immediately see that they are part of a series. I don't know if there's going to be another one, but if there isn't, this was a good ending. And yeah, as I said, more dragons. These ones are quite cute. The next book I read was Circus of Mirrors by Julie Owen Moylan. I interviewed Julie for my podcast, Being Bookish, and I will post the link to that in the info box below. This is a fantastic historical novel that takes you through multiple decades in Berlin post First World War, starting in 1926, ending in 1961 when the Berlin Wall goes up. So much happens, and we all, as we discussed in the podcast, we tend to focus on what happens in our own country post-war. We focused on the rebuilding of England or America after the Blitz, after bombings, Pearl Harbor, and so on and so forth. But we don't really think about what happened in Berlin, in Germany, when the everyday person was rebuilding after absolute devastation that was not actually of their choosing or their doing, especially in the case of these two sisters, Leni and Annetta, who were living in Berlin. They started, the book starts when Leni is 19 and her sister Annetta is 6 or 7, and they go through all of this trauma. They lose their parents, they lose their home. Leni is forced to abandon any decisions, anything that she wants to do in order to care for her younger sister, and she has to get jobs, she has to try and make ends meet, and sacrifices everything for her younger sister, who has seen all of this and thought, well, everyone's doing things for me. And it's the comparison between the two sisters and how they cope with these events, especially when one is so much younger than the other. And it ends on the day after the Berlin Wall has gone up, and so much has changed in these two sisters' lives. They've gone in totally different directions, where Leni has stayed put, Annetta has desperately moved away from Berlin and Germany as a whole. So it talks about their relationship, the growth and the change that they go through, and all the sacrifices that they've made in order to get there. And it's a fantastic historical study of women during wartime and everything that they have to go through and all the things that they have had to sacrifice, irregardless of the fact whether they served or not. So that is Circus of Mirrors, and that actually comes out today if you're watching on the 12th. Fantastic read, especially if you enjoy historical romance and historical novels and character-driven stories. So that's Circus of Mirrors. The next book was the second book on my list of 1-star reviews, Pick My Reads, and that was Ithaca by Claire North. I am a huge Greek mythology lover, and this is covering the years after the end of the Trojan War and what happens in Ithaca with Penelope, Odysseus's wife, while she's waiting for her husband to come home. And it also looks at the relationship she has with her cousin Clytemnestra, whose story I absolutely loved. Is behind me there. It kind of brings her into the story and her children, and it's not a bad book. It's nowhere near as bad as the review made it out to be, and as I said, I will post the link to that extended review below. I love the character of Penelope, though I don't think she gets enough time in the myths because they are very, very masculine focused. But I'm not quite sure if this was the best book for me. I didn't give it 1 star because I think it deserved far more than that. There's clearly a lot of research gone into these stories, and the cover is gorgeous, as the review says. But I do think that this is going to be the only one of this series I read. There are several others that come after it, including, I believe, The House of Odysseus is the next one. And there goes all the pile of books behind me. That was not a great move. The next book is one that I had been waiting for, and because I loved the first, and that is Ghostsmith by Nikki Palpretto. I absolutely loved Bonesmith, which came before it. This is a duology, and this is the second one. Obviously, it's the sequel. It is as beautifully written as the first. It includes certain elements of Norse mythology, including Valkyries, and it starts where the last book left off. You don't suffer any element of loss when it comes to character development. In fact, that continues. There are a lot of complex underlying plots, including a very dark plot with the main character's mother and father, which is quite disturbing. I have to be honest and say that was, read it and all I could think was, oh my God, that's horrible. But actually, words to that effect, they were far more vociferous than that. But I really enjoyed the story, and I think that it was one of those books that just carried on building anticipation. Ren was a very strong female character, and she had to go through a heck of a lot to get to the ending that she managed to achieve. I don't want to spoil anything because I do think if you enjoy slightly darker fantasy, it's not completely black and horrific. There are elements of lightheartedness and hope in this book. But if you do like something that has got a basis in light mythology and then character development is important, Ghostsmith and the prequel Bonesmith are definitely two books I would recommend. This was probably one of my favourite reads of the month. Next book is one I read for a book tour, and that is Costanza by Rachel Blackmore. I am a huge, massive fan of Gian Bernini's sculpture. It's stunning. I actually did a dissertation on it for my classics degree, which I didn't quite finish, but we don't need to go there. And he has created some beautiful art. He was his patron was the Pope of the time, so he had quite a considerable amount of power, and was also, everything was funded by the church. And Costanza was his mistress for a time. She was the wife of someone who worked with Bernini, and she actually is, if you look at this, you can see there are various sculptures sketched out. She is actually the subject of one of his sculptures, which is still around today, and it's in a collection in a house. Sadly, his brother was a piece of work, really, really nasty, and he assaulted Costanza and told his brother that she had decided she wanted to be with him instead. So Bernini had her face slashed with a razor by somebody he paid. During this particular period of time in Italy, where everything was ruled by the church, women were considered incredibly low, and if a woman cheated on her husband, then she was the one punished, not the person she cheated with. And so Costanza was sent to a convent where she depended on the goodwill of the person who had reported her for her acts, which it turned out was someone that she was very close to. I don't want to go into more detail because obviously this is the fictional interpretation of certain events that truly did occur, which makes me sad because, as I said, I love Bernini's sculpture, but this is the point where you go, I have to separate art from artist, despite the fact this occurred in like the 1600s. And she is left there to her wounds to fester and to starve because the people who are funding her are the people that reported her in the first place. And it's all about her growth, and for a large part of the novel it is about her relationship with Bernini. I absolutely love this book. I think it was incredibly well written. I want to read more by Rachel Blackmore because I think she's fantastic writer, and the research that went into this, as I said, it made me have to do a massive pivot on he's so talented. Yes, he is talented, but he was a horrible person. So that is Costanza by Rachel Blackmore, and that was book 9 of the month. Book 10 of the month is, I'm going to pause on the book I was going to pick up. Book 10 of the month was actually a book that I read on NetGalley, and it was Enemies to Lovers by Laura Jane Williams. And I just had to look that up because I have to be honest, I had completely forgotten I had read it. It is based on it takes place on a holiday. The main character is on holiday with her family, and a man that he wasn't ready for a relationship. She really wanted a relationship, and it goes and then when they're on holiday together, things come to a head because she'd had a nervous breakdown. She was suffering severe mental issues, and a lot of things happen. And I have to be honest, I sat here and I'm like, I'd forgotten I read that book. That's never a good sign. I didn't think it was incredible. It was a sweet holiday romance, but as I read through books, I'm realizing that I'm not really up for a sweet holiday romance anymore. I like something that's got a little bit of grit to it, maybe, or something that's a little bit more in depth. So, Enemies to Lovers by Laura Jane Williams, I did give it 3.5 stars. I think because it was well written, it just wasn't my type of book. And I don't think it's fair to say, well, just because it wasn't my type of book at that moment in time doesn't mean I can't appreciate that it was well written. I also think that the characters may have been a little bit too flat and too wishy-washy for me. However, that was book 10 of the month. And it's got an interesting cover. It seems to take a lot from the Emily Henry inspiration, maybe, looking at the style of cover. Not that I've actually read any Emily Henry either, though I have recommended them to my niece because currently she's reading Colleen Hoover and Hannah Grace, and I'm trying to guide her in a little bit of a different direction if she'll take it. But she's reading, and that's something because she didn't used to read anything at all. Okay, so I've already talked about it once in a previous video, my 1-star reviews, which I've mentioned a few times because that is going to come up every single month. And my last book, book 11, was The Kingdom is a Golden Cage by Lily Inkwood. This is the first ever book I haven't even rated 1 star and actually still rated it. And I'm not sure if I can say anything else about it apart from I really didn't like this book at all. And sometimes you sit here and you go, but there must have been something good about it. And I always try and find the good in a book, whether it is the writing style just wasn't for me at that moment, but it is still very good. Fantastic description. The narration, the narrative is great. The end was really well worked out. It didn't suffer from massive cliches. I can't find anything good about this book. The physical copy, I can say, is beautiful, but the book itself, no. This is already on my I'm unhauling it shelf. And yeah, if I had actually already done it, you'd have found it on my Vinted. That sounds really awful because I'm saying, well, I didn't like it, but somebody else may do. It just isn't my type of thing. I like fairy tales to a point, but I'm not a massive fan of fairy tale retellings despite enjoying mythological retellings. So maybe that's where I'm falling down on this one. This, I think also the fact that the sequel or the second book in this series is actually the story that should have been told first. And that is another of the issues that I have with this particular series of books. I'm also perplexed as to how it got published. I'm sorry. I feel really bad for saying that, but at the same time, this is my opinion and I'm going to stick to it. I did not like this book. So that was book 11 of the month. It's going, I have to be honest, it's going very, very slowly in September so far. We are currently on day 11 as I record this, and I am still on book 2. So yeah, it looks like August is going to be a far better reading month than this one was, but hey, we cannot have everything. And I have to be honest, I do think that there's something to be said for reading a variety of books, because I've definitely done that this month. Anyway, that is all I have read, though I am sure I have read something else and I cannot remember what it is, but my list on Storygraph says otherwise, so I have to go with it. So until next time, this is me saying bye.